All right, so we're diving into something that, might seem really simple on the surface.
Yeah.
When you go to a notary public, what kind of ID do you need?
Right.
And you would think it's just like, oh, show your driver's license and you're good.
Yeah.
But actually, there's a whole world of rules and regulations around notary ID.
Oh, yeah. You're absolutely right. It is way more complicated than people think.
Really?
Notaries, they're not just checking your ID, they're actually public officials.
Okay.
So their actions have legal weight. And so proper ID verification, that's a cornerstone of their job.
Gotcha.
It's crucial for preventing fraud.
Okay, so the stakes are high then.
Yes, they are.
And we've got a really interesting mix of sources today to guide our deep dive.
Right.
We've got some general guides on notary practices.
Yeah.
We've got insights into specific legal requirements.
Yeah.
And we've even got some real-life scenarios that notaries have shared themselves.
Wow.
And we're going to be kind of weaving all of this together
Okay.
to help you understand what types of identification are considered valid.
And why that matters so much.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about the kinds of documents that often need notarization.
Okay.
Like property deeds, contracts, affidavits.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't just pieces of paper. These are legal instruments with huge implications.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
What are the most common, widely accepted forms of ID that notaries usually are looking for?
So we've got a couple of sources here. Acceptable ID needed for notary. And determine if ID is acceptable for notarization.
Okay.
And both of them kind of point to the same IDs that we're all pretty familiar with. So, state-issued driver's licenses, passports, military IDs, government-issued IDs, permanent resident cards, sometimes called green cards.
Okay, that makes sense. But I noticed that one of the guides used the phrase, in most cases, when talking about these IDs.
Oh, interesting.
So are there situations where these might not be enough?
Yeah.
Or what if someone doesn't have any of those?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
So let's unpack a concept called personal knowledge. Okay.
So in some places, if the notary already knows you personally, that can be enough to verify your identity.
So it's like, hey, I know you're good to go.
Well, not quite that simple.
Okay.
There are safeguards built into the process.
Okay.
For example, California law specifically prohibits using personal knowledge.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
Why would that be?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, California recognized the potential pitfalls with personal knowledge.
Oh, okay.
Imagine, a notary verifying a close friend's identity for a major financial transaction.
Yeah.
There's a risk of bias or even the appearance of impropriety.
That's true.
And on our memories, they're not perfect.
Yeah.
So California's rule really helps ensure a more objective and consistent approach to verification.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So personal knowledge is off the table in some places.
Yeah.
What are the other options if you don't have those standard IDs we talked about?
Well, you could rely on a credible identifying witness.
So this is someone we know who also knows the notary.
Okay.
The key is they have to have their own valid ID.
Gotcha.
And they have to be willing to swear under oath that you are who you say you are.
So it's like having a friend vouch for you, but with much higher stakes.
Exactly. It's a way to provide extra assurance when the traditional forms of ID aren't available.
Okay.
Now, there's also the subscribing witness route.
Okay.
This comes into play in really specific situations, like when you can't physically be there in front of the notary.
I can see that happening a lot of different reasons.
Right.
They have a disability that prevents them from traveling.
Right.
Maybe you're living out of state or even out of the country.
Exactly. In those cases, the subscribing witness acts as your representative. They sign on your behalf.
Okay.
And confirm your identity to the notary.
Gotcha.
It's a crucial option, for people who might face barriers to getting something notarized.
So we've got the common IDs.
Yep.
We've talked about personal knowledge.
Yep.
We've touched on these alternative methods with witnesses.
Right.
But what about some of the trickier situations?
Okay.
Like what happens if your ID is expired?
Ooh.
One of our sources brought this up specifically.
Yeah, that's where we start to see some inconsistencies across different states.
Okay.
Some states require a current ID, meaning it can't be expired at all.
Right.
Others allow a little bit of leeway.
Okay.
They'll permit expired IDs, but only within a certain time frame.
Great.
For example, Virginia has a rule that allows assisted living residents to use IDs that have been expired for less than 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
That seems like a long time for an ID to be considered valid?
It's an interesting point, right?
Yeah.
It seems like Virginia is trying to balance security with accessibility.
Okay.
Especially for a population that might have trouble renewing their IDs regularly.
It makes you think about how different states approach this whole thing.
Yeah.
Of, ID verification.
For sure.
But sometimes even a valid ID might not be enough.
Uh-huh.
What about fake IDs? Oh, yeah.
How do notaries even handle that potential for fraud?
Well, our sources give us some good insights into this.
Okay.
Notaries are trained to be really vigilant.
Okay.
They're looking for telltale signs of a fake, like a photo that doesn't match the person,
right,
or any alterations to the document.
Okay, so they're kind of playing detective a little bit.
In a way, yeah.
Scrutinizing everything.
But it's important to remember there's a human element involved, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
People change their appearance over time.
Right.
They might legally change their names, even their gender identity.
Yeah.
So a good notary has to be able to spot inconsistencies, but also be sensitive to legitimate changes in someone's life.
That's a really delicate balance.
It is.
It's not just about blindly following rules.
Right.
There's a need for judgment.
Yeah.
Understanding.
Okay.
Speaking of things that aren't always black and white,
Okay.
we found some conflicting information about green cards, permanent resident cards.
One source lists them as acceptable.
Right.
But another source, specifically focused on California, said they're not valid for notarization in that state.
Yeah, and that discrepancy really highlights why it's so important for both notaries and ND individuals to know their state-specific laws.
Yeah.
There's no one-size-fits-all answer
when
it comes to notary rules and regulations.
So good reminder to always do your research.
Yes.
Before heading to the notary.
Absolutely.
That's where organizations like the National Notary Association can be really helpful.
Oh, yeah, they're great.
They provide resources and guidance tailored to different states. So notaries and anyone needing something notarized can stay informed and avoid potential pitfalls.
Exactly.
Now, there's one last scenario I want to touch on before we move on.
Okay.
What happens if someone doesn't have any form of ID at all?
Wow.
I mean, we've talked about all these different options, but what if you just don't have a driver's license, a passport, any of the other documents we talked about?
That's a reality for millions of Americans.
Really?
It's a big challenge.
Yeah.
According to a study by the Brennan Center for Justice, a lack of identification can create major barriers to accessing essential services.
Oh, wow.
Including legal processes.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
So what can someone do in that situation?
Right.
Are there any options?
Some states allow for the use of credible witnesses.
Okay.
In cases where an individual doesn't have any form of ID.
Okay.
But you can imagine relying just on witness testimony.
Yeah.
It brings up its own challenges in terms of reliability and potential for abuse.
For sure.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Absolutely. And we need to explore this further.
We do.
We've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah.
But it feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
I agree.
Of this whole notary ID thing. Clearly a topic with layers upon layers of complexity.
Absolutely.
What do you say we take a moment to gather our thoughts? And then we'll come back and dive even deeper into some of the nuances.
Sounds good.
That we've uncovered.
I'm ready. You're absolutely right. We have only just begun to kind of dig into the whole notary ID requirements.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating journey, though, for sure.
Before we go any further, though.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of hung up on those green cards we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It's strange that one source listed them as an acceptable form of ID, but another one specifically mentioned that they're not valid in California.
Yeah, I think it's not really a contradiction as much as it is a matter of perspective.
Okay.
The source that listed them as acceptable was offering like a broader overview.
Right.
Highlighting the common types of ID that are generally accepted. But when you zero in on a specific state like California, you often find little nuances in the law.
So it's all about context.
Precisely. And this highlights the importance of understanding that notary regulations can vary from state to state.
Right.
What might be totally fine in one place could be different somewhere else.
Okay. Good reminder for anyone who needs to get something notarized. Always check your state's specific rules.
Always.
Speaking of specific rules, let's circle back to something we talked about earlier.
Okay.
The U.S. passport card.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, some states are starting to accept those as valid ID for notarization.
That's right. One of our sources mentioned California and Oregon are among the states that have embraced that.
Interesting.
As a valid form of ID for notaries, and other states, especially those along the border, are considering doing the same thing.
Makes sense. The passport card is designed for travel within North America, so it seems logical to expand its use for other official purposes.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
One of the comments on that article pointed out a potentially huge detail.
Uh-oh, what's that?
The passport card doesn't actually have a signature element on it.
Oh, that's a good catch.
Yeah.
Right, raises a really important question.
Yeah.
How do states that require a signature on the ID handle the passport card?
Seems like a loophole.
Yeah, how can you verify someone's signature if there's no signature to compare it to?
Exactly.
It could be that those states have additional checks in place when it comes to passport cards.
Okay.
Maybe they require, like, supplemental documentation or rely on different verification methods.
Right.
Or maybe, and this is a little concerning, they haven't fully addressed this yet.
A gray area in the making.
Yeah. It really highlights how notary regulations are constantly evolving.
Yeah.
Trying to keep up with new forms of ID and advances in technology.
You've hit the nail on the head, and it really underscores the need for clarity and consistency in these regulations.
I agree.
This is where resources like the National Notary Association are so valuable.
They are a great resource.
They help notaries and the public alike navigate all of these complexities and make sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
I think this is a good point to wrap up this part of our discussion.
Okay.
We've explored the common forms of ID.
Yeah.
We delved into the nuances of personal knowledge and witness testimony, and even uncovered some potential inconsistencies in how certain IDs are handled.
Right.
It's clear that the world of notary ID is far more complex than meets the eye.
Absolutely.
But we're not done yet.
Oh.
There's still one more aspect of this topic
that
we need to address, and it's perhaps the most challenging of all.
All right, I'm ready.
We still need to talk about individuals who lack any form of government-issued ID.
Right.
It's a significant issue that impacts millions of Americans.
Yeah.
And raises questions about access to justice and social equity.
Big questions.
And we'll explore those questions in our final segment. We spent this whole deep dive looking at the in and outs of these notary ID requirements.
Yeah.
We started with the most common forms of identification, and then we kind of moved into those trickier situations with witnesses and expired IDs.
Right.
But now we need to address a really challenging aspect of this.
Okay.
What happens when someone doesn't have any form of government-issued ID at all?
That's a tough one. It's a sobering reality for millions of Americans.
Yeah, and as we learned from that Brennan Center study, lacking proper identification, it can be a huge GE barrier to accessing essential services, including legal processes that require notarization.
Absolutely.
It makes you think about those assumptions we make about having a driver's license or a passport.
Yeah.
We take it for granted.
Totally.
But for a lot of people, it's just not their reality.
And this lack of ID, it often disproportionately affects marginalized communities.
Yeah.
Low-income individuals, people experiencing homelessness, racial and ethnic minorities.
It creates that vicious cycle where those who are already facing systemic disadvantages, they're further excluded from participating in society.
Exactly. And it's not just bureaucratic hurdles. This is about social justice.
So what can be done to address this? Are there any solutions or resources for people who find themselves in this situation?
Well, some states have started implementing programs aimed at making it easier for people to get valid identification. These often involve partnerships between government agencies, community organizations, and legal aid groups. They might help with gathering the necessary documents or covering the cost associated with getting an ID, or even providing transportation to ID issuing offices.
So it sounds like a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But are these programs widespread enough? Are they effective in reaching the people that they're designed to help?
That's the challenge. While they exist, their availability and effectiveness can vary. Depending on the location and funding. There's definitely a need for more comprehensive and equitable solutions at both the state and federal levels.
It sounds like this is an area where advocacy and awareness are crucial.
Absolutely. Organizations like the Brennan Center, they're doing really important work to bring this issue to light and push for meaningful changes.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this world of notary ID, it's clear that we've found more than just a set of rules.
It's more than just rules.
We've run into ethical considerations, societal challenges, and this profound reminder that access to justice is linked to access to identification.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's been a thought-provoking journey, and I hope our listeners will keep exploring this topic and consider those broader implications.
Absolutely.
Knowledge is power, after all.
That's right. And understanding these things empowers us to advocate for a more just and inclusive society.
I agree.
Well, that concludes our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating exploration.
It's been fun.
Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.